Hi there, let me walk you through 9 things that you need to know about the NEBOSH NG1 or IG1 exam if you want to pass on the first attempt. First thing you need to know is that you have to answer all of the bleeding questions, all right? It's like, sometimes I recommend that you answer the questions in the order from easiest to hardest, and there is a risk, therefore, that you might forget to answer one of the questions. If that question's a 10-mark question, then you're not being marked out of 100 marks anymore. No, you've been marked out of 90 because you've missed a 10-mark question. So you're trying to get 45 marks out of 90. It's like you've just disadvantaged yourself massively. Answer all of the questions. Number 2 is give as many answers as there are marks available. In fact, give more. Let's take a look at this example here. So we've got 17 marks available there, all right, which means that we have to say 17 different things. We have to make 17 technical points. Probably, that's the way most marking schemes work. There are 17 things at least which were wrong with the management commitment at the fast food outlet. And so when you're going through your scenario, looking for all the things that are wrong, you want to be highlighting, finding everything that you can find which was wrong about what the manager did. There's a load of evidence there. There's tons of it in there. Use it. And then for each one, of course, you're going to explain in more detail, we're using the evidence from the scenario, explain in more detail why that was wrong. Now, some of your points are going to be, your points are going to be wrong, right? You might have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things in your answer which don't get a mark. Maybe it's not on the marking scheme, maybe it's incorrect, maybe you didn't explain enough, maybe it's a duplicate of a previous point you already made. So I recommend try to find more technical points than the exam question asks for. If it's a 17-mark question like this one here, try to say 20 things, 25 things. On the marking scheme, there are always more technical points available than there are marks. So there's loads of stuff on the marking scheme. You just need to figure out what that is. Point number 3, there are no marks for copying and pasting the scenario. So when you get a question like this where it says, what's wrong with management commitment? Just copying and pasting random bits, there are no shoe coverings available. Yeah, that's bad. Okay, copying and pasting that and putting it in your exam answer will not get any marks. You're gonna have to make a point, a clear point, and for example, management failed to provide the PPE in sufficient numbers because there weren't enough shoe coverings available. And what makes that wrong? So, well, managers who are committed to health and safety will provide the equipment and resources necessary for their staff to work safely. And here they failed to provide enough shoe coverings, which is probably because they don't care. There you go. There's your explanation, right? Don't just copy and paste things. You won't get marks. Number 4, speaking of copying and pasting things from your workbook, from your online course materials, just copying and pasting, like take all of that and dumping that into the exam answer sheet. That's not going to get marks either by itself. And it could even be considered malpractice unless you make it absolutely clear that you are quoting your materials. So use your materials to give you a bit of a head start. Write a list of concise points, maybe from your materials or from the scenario, and then add in the evidence and add in the explanation. No copying and pasting of anything, and if you do, make sure you reference it and say this is a quote from this document, a quote from the HC website, a quote from the legislation.gov website. Point number 5, there is no strict word count at current time of filming. NEBOSH, now there's a little bit of a contradiction here from NEBOSH. In one guidance document, they say there's a strict word count, but on the exam papers, they say you are not expected to write more than 3,000 words in total. So you're not expected to. Right, now if there was a strict word count limit, they would have to say, because they're a regulated qualifications and awarding body, they would have to say, in fairness, you must not exceed. And they don't say that. They say you are not expected to. They're setting an expectation. They would like you not to write too much. They would like you to not go past 3,000, 3,500 words. I have students every month writing 4,500, 5,000 words, and they get great marks. Like they get 50, 60, 70%. Great marks, even though they've absolutely smashed through that 3,000 word barrier. Use more words sometimes to give fuller explanations. Point number 6. Duplicated points will only get 1 mark. On a marking scheme, there's a list of things which are mark worthy that you can talk about. And if you write two different paragraphs which kind of cover the same point or a very closely related point, the examiner can only give you 1 mark for those 2 paragraphs. You can only get the mark for something once, you can't get it twice. So if you're getting a question about, say, the financial arguments for improving safety, and you talk about overtime, and then maybe you talk about employing temporary workers to catch back on production time, maybe on the marking scheme it might say overtime / temporary workers. I'm not saying that for certain, it depends on the marking scheme, but sometimes they group things together which are very similar. For example, they might group legal costs and defence costs. And so if you do a paragraph on legal costs and a paragraph on the defence costs, it's like you're probably only going to get 1 mark for that. So just bear that in mind. And that goes back to my previous point where I said, write more points than are required by the points in the question, just in case some of your points are duplicated. Point 7, we've got some guidance from NEBOSH on scenario-based assessments, and the guidance is really good. If you just Google NEBOSH scenario-based assessment guidance, you will find this guidance document. It's really very useful. There's a whole table of contents talking about language, scenario questions, types of questions, command words, and it even gives right at the very bottom some examples of questions and answers, and then shows you why and how it got marks, and then it explains why things didn't get marks. So here, look, these are the answers, and these 3 didn't get marks, and down here it explains why they didn't get marks. It's a really cool guidance document. I recommend you take a thorough look at that. Point number 8. There is one thing I recommend you ignore in that guidance document. Point number 8 says that you can answer certain questions with only brief answers. Let's take a look at that. It says here, it gives an example for financial arguments, and it says it's looking for brief technical health and safety points such as sick pay, investigation costs and fines. And it kind of gives you the wrong impression. It's almost saying you can list those answers. Sick pay, fines, legal costs, damage to reputation. It's not, a list of those answers is not going to get marks. So it says brief technical points. Yeah, it's a brief point, but it still wants, notice, it still wants a reference to the scenario. It still wants the evidence. So we go back to our P principle. P principle every time for me. You know, it might be overdoing it, but I recommend the P principle every time. We make a point, you can make it briefly, you can get fined. And then you can use evidence from the scenario to say, well, look, you've got all these accidents happening and that's a breach of legislation, which means you can get fined. And you probably don't need to do it, but I think you should, just in case your examiner has a slightly harsher than they should be.
I'm gonna get that son of a...
Add in a further explanation to show the examiner, so what? Connects the evidence to the point. You could say, you know, they're failing to take action on all these trip accidents, and failing to take action could lead to an even higher fine. And it could be hundreds of thousands of pounds, and it's really expensive. It would be cheaper to just stop the trip accidents by keeping the place tidy. You know, you can add on that extra explanation, and that would absolutely nail the mark. And it only takes 2 to 3 lines. Short paragraphs, 2 to 3 lines, with a point, evidence from the scenario, and a bit of an explanation as to what the hell you're talking about and why it matters. Point number 9, don't even think about cheating. It's like, there's actually quite a few different ways you can cheat, right? And there's a high likelihood of being caught out here, because NEBOSH use the Turnitin online system. It means your exam paper is going to get passed through an online system which will automatically compare your paper to everybody else's paper, and also to everything available on the internet. So one way that people try to cheat, and they often get caught, is that they collaborate with other students and they share answers. Right, so you're going to get caught if you do that, because your answers are going to be similar or identical to somebody else's. And if they investigate and they find out that you were in the same group or the same class, if you're doing a classroom course or something, or you're from the same course provider, there's going to be some suspicion there. Another way of cheating is where you pay somebody to sit the test for you. There are people, particularly out there in, say, India and Pakistan and Middle East and Africa. I know, I've seen them on YouTube, I've seen them advertise their services, where they're advertising Their service is to answer questions for you. Those people have lots of customers. They're answering the papers for say 10, 15, 20 different customers, and they're answering all of those papers in one day. I bet you they will be using very similar answers for every paper. They might reword it a bit here and there, but there are going to be strong similarities, and therefore the Turnitin system is quite likely to catch you out. So don't do that. A more recent way of cheating that people are trying is ChatGPT. So basically, and I've got a whole video on this and I'm trying to answer the questions, can ChatGPT pass a NEBOSH exam? Well, you take your scenario, you dump it into ChatGPT, and then you ask it questions on the scenario. And sometimes, in fairness, sometimes it comes up with some pretty decent answers. My guess is that ChatGPT can pass a NEBOSH exam paper, depending on what the questions are. Some questions, it's an absolute car crash. Now, the problem you have with ChatGPT is this: NEBOSH are not stupid. NEBOSH are now putting in the exam paper into ChatGPT, and they're asking ChatGPT to answer the questions, and then they're submitting the answer sheet to the Turnitin system. So your exam paper is going to be compared to whatever answers ChatGPT gave NEBOSH. It's going to give you maybe not identical answers, but very similar answers. It's going to read like it was written by a robot. It's going to have little numbers at the start of every paragraph, and it's going to use American language. And it just reads like it's written from a robot. So, you know, the only way you could somehow wriggle through that is you'd have to rephrase like a British person every single answer it gives you and correct all the grammar, take all the Americanizations out. Frankly, it's going to be a whole lot of hassle. I just don't bother. There's a lot of work in there, and the likelihood of being caught is high. If you get caught, you're looking at potential ban. Yeah, that's worst case scenario. Potentially being voided, potentially being banned. So as a general rule, do not cheat. Do not use ChatGPT. There we are. Hope you thought that was helpful. Anyway, if you're studying with me on my NEBOSH course, I will see you in a tutorial.